Dear students, today we will be discussing a period quite fascinating, quite intriguing, and quite influential in the history of international cinema. I am referring to La Nouvelle Vague, the New Wave, a period which crossed the frontiers of France and cast its spell over the entire film empire in this planet. So, what was Nouvelle Vague? In fact, it means nothing or it means everything. A journalist called Francois Girardot just casually labeled the attempts made by a few young filmmakers as Nouvelle Vague, so the term gained currency and became New Wave. You'd see what was so new about this New Wave. Yes, what was so new about this New Wave? Practically, New Wave is the beginning of modern cinema. Why? Because New Wave is a movement which first systematically wanted to arrive at a point where expression of thought can be made possible to be printed in celluloid images. Long before its formal arrival in French scenario in 1958-59, a lesser known critic and filmmaker, Alexandre Astrux, wrote a beautiful article called La Caméra de Stylo, where he argued for a kind of cinematic approach when a camera can be given the freedom of a pen. The way camera allows a person to use his cerebral pattern in everything. So wrote Astrux, but along with it, we must admit that it was a kind of renovation of technology which made possible the use of camera in a more subtle way. The camera became easier to handle. And it was at the same time two more events took place in France which helped filmmakers to look differently at the medium. First was the popularization of a journal called Le Cahier du Cinéma, in English, the exercise book of cinema. It allowed young critics like François Truffaut, Jean-Luc Godard, Eric Remer, Jacques-Daniel Valcroc, and others to write freely on the cinemas they experience regularly in the French auditoriums. And the other thing is that there was an archive newly formed called Cinémathèque Française, where regular screening of early American films and other films were taking place. So a group of filmmakers, quite innovative, fresh, they were allowed to experience cinema in a different perspective. André Bazin was there to teach them theoretically on the real nuances of realism, how the importance of mise-en-scène can be differentiated from the importance of montage. Henri Langlois was there to make them understand the historicity of film itself. And Jean Cocteau was there to guide them through the domains and the corridors of French cinema. So, a kind of momentum was created when the entire medium could be reinterrogated. How? Again, we will find 2 points. One, the moment of politique des auteurs. You see, cinema till then was considered to be a kind of collective art, an art created mainly by the industry. But having a new look on the American industry, these people, by these people I mainly mean François Truffaut, Jean-Luc Godard, Claude Chabrol, Jacques-Daniel Valcroc, Alain Resnais, and others. They thought that if even within the American industry, a kind of personal signature can be invented by people like Howard Hawks, Alfred Hitchcock, John Ford, Aldrich, Nicolas Ray, then why not in French cinema? After all, a person should inscribe his own signature. If you consider art as a whole, it's not a unique thing. But in cinema, it was really unique. The left thumb impression of a director on the whole product became very much important. And Truffaut, very young, only at 21, wrote an article, A Certain Tendency in French Cinema in January 1954 issue of Cahiers du Cinéma, which became a hallmark with modernist cinema in the sense that it first advocated the cause of director in a cinema, which was later proved in his short films and matured films like Le Miston, The Brats, and The 400 Blows, Les Quatre Cents Coups. In Breathless, made by Jean-Luc Godard. In Hiroshima Mon Amour, made by Alain Resnais. And the other point was a kind of rearrangement of fact and fiction. We had two types of cinema. One, cinema based on documents, usually labeled as documentaries, and the other cinema called as narrative cinema, which had its foundation on the fictional spaces. They submerged them, the both. Godard said, New Wave can be defined partly in its attempt to redefine the fact and fiction relationship. No fact is complete unless it is punctuated by fiction, and no fiction is meaningful unless it is validated by documentary context, and partly through the nostalgic regret for a cinema which no longer exists. They bid adieu to the cinema of the 40s by labeling them as cinema of the papa. Why cinema of the papa? Because they strongly objected to the notion that cinema can be translated from good literary text. They, on the other hand, claimed that cinema can be anything which can be conceived and executed by the director. I give you two specific examples. Say, when Truffaut made his first feature film, Les Quatre Cents Coups, which completely revolutionized the face of French cinema and made French cinema popular all over the world. Let us consider the concluding sequence, so dear to Satyajit Ray, where real time nearly equaled the real time. This escape story of a boy. You would watch the camera quite religiously and quite scrupulously following the track of the boy. Three movements will find: tracking, then panning, and then freezing. It was Satyajit Ray who so brilliantly showed that Truffaut apparently pretended that he was left with no alternative but to take recourse to such an action, and he was the first person to prove that camera was no trickery, although it was arranged. But he could prove that realism is essential and a director is condemned to be real. He has no way out. And what did he do? He made it possible to write his own autobiography, but then at the concluding sequence, he could overcome his personal preoccupations and could make the anguish of the boy universal. It got a universally valid statement. The same thing with Jean-Luc Godard. He made a Hollywood B-movie type thing, in fact, in his first film, Breathless. The subject has no importance. A car thief stole a car, spent a night with a girl, and then was caught and killed. That's the story.
Michel, emmène-moi.
Il est quelle heure?
11h moins 10.
Non, ciao. Maintenant, je fonce, Alphonse. La 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 la, la 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 la.
Average story for any American B movie. But what did Godard do? Why is so important? Because he incorporated his own criticism of American B movie thriller with the film. In an interview, he claimed that as critics of Cahiers du Cinema, we all conceived ourselves to be future directors. We were all essayists, writing essays in novel form or novels in essay form. Now, as filmmakers, we feel only quantitative difference because between writing and filming, there is a fundamental difference. It's a kind of going from one room to other. Only instead of writing them, I now film them. So the element of historicism was brought in. How the old techniques of iris in and iris out, wipe, dissolve, could be redefined. If you look at Breathless, if you look at the last scene, so famous, so iconic in the history of modern cinema, you would find that Godard was just exasperated to know that such a kind of tracking shot would take so much money and so much time consumption. So he requested his friend and now internationally famous film photographer Raoul Coulthard to make it shorter. So Raoul suggested a kind of handheld camera treatment. You clearly feel that the camera is faulty. It is swinging. This is not a smooth tracking, but people liked it the way they liked jeans in the 60s. So, New Wave cinema spoke of life, life taken from the pavements, life taken from the stolen kisses, life taken from the political graffitis. You see, modernity painted on the toilet walls, politics and sex, both, we take them both. It is Godard saying during the making of Mascula Femina. And while Satyajit Ray analyzed Mascula Femina, he didn't like Godard that way, that he quite unashamedly said that he is the most important countercultural figure in the international cinema. He explained the first sequence of Mascula Femina. How brilliant a review he made. He said that it was Godard who can make the essentials of a frame non-essential, and the non-essential a kind of essential. He could make polar opposites of the convention, and that is why he is great. You see, you take the case of Alain Resnais, time present, time past, and time future. If you look at the chronological sequence, you would feel that Resnais did away with all that. A filmmaker at the end of the Cannes Film Festival asked Godard, Monsieur Godard, everything said and done, but you must admit that a film has a clear beginning, a middle, and an end. To which Godard said, yes, but not necessarily in the same order. Yes, there you are. Nouvelle Vague is a movement which created new cinemas, but not necessarily in the same order, not necessarily in the order of Griffith and Chaplin, not necessarily in the order of Renoir and Bresson, not necessarily in the order of Eisenstein and Pudovkin. They made elaborate use of spaces. They used deep focus shots. They used long sequences and, quite wrongly, wrong cuts. I said, within quotation, wrong cuts. The elliptical editing and the nature of disorientations that were brought by mainly Godard created a kind of passion for the new generation who were so upbeat with the Beat movement, with the Beatles. They found these dissonances, these visual dissonances, quite acceptable for modern living. And with Truffaut, they found a kind of youngish longing for randomness. When Truffaut made a cross-generic interference in Thérèse Shoot the Pianist, or when he, along with the changes of Picasso paintings, narrated the problem of polygamy or monogamy, question of friendship in Jules Jim, or in Fahrenheit 451, described a civilization which can consider books as oblivious. When in Last Metro or in other films, he ceaselessly questioned the man-woman relationship. We got interested because it is our own life. It's like newspaper. In fact, Godard did away with the representational mode of cinema, because in cinema we are more accustomed to converge to the center of a frame. He changed the whole process of seeing. He made elaborate uses of collage. The periphery became as important as the center. The narrative lost its coherence. We were nowhere in the narrative. He submitted essays only as traffic signals. He gave us some indications of narratives. In fact, he is a deliberate iconoclast in the sense that he did away with all the narratives. He mislocated shots but could get away because he knew that modernity is not about continuity and smooth journey. It has its lapses, and these lapses are part of lives, and New Wave is part of life. New Wave is important because it is the first film movement which foregrounded the function of cerebral cortex in cinema. They believed in the submission of discourses. Resnais, when he made Hiroshima Mon Amour, he brought into existence the dialogue between two civilizations, France and Japan, that were East and the West. It's not a question of physical proximity of a Japanese tourist guide with a French actress. It is a dialogue opened between the East and the West. We find time almost static, almost acting like a frozen object in Hiroshima Mon Amour.
faut éviter de penser à ces difficultés que présente le monde quelquefois. Sans ça, il deviendrait tout à fait irrespirable. Éloigne-toi de moi.
Le jour n'est pas encore levé.
Non. Il est probable que nous mourrons sans nous être jamais revus.
Il est probable, oui. Sauf peut-être un jour. La guerre.
In last year at Marienbad, you find the last relic of realism vanishing. You don't know where you are. You only know you exist. These great puzzles of existentialism were brought into the cinematic arena by Alain Resnais. And when you talk of Godard, he is the greatest of political leftists in modern cinema. He questioned every aspect of capitalism, every aspect, and he actually narrated the story of Marx and Coca-Cola, a generation which discussed Marx, Coca-Cola and Vietnam in the same breath. And by discussing, he could prove that it is not the religion of cinema to tell you a telltale story comprising a boy and a girl. This is not a coffee shop book. This is a serious endeavor where images can be allowed to talk among themselves and to get you involved so that you can have your own access through the cinematic passages of time. And therefore, New Wave is a moment of liberation. New Wave is the moment of liberation for all of us who thought that cinema has a grammar. No, cinema has no grammar. If you want to talk, you can talk freely, provided it works. That was the energy and enthusiasm supplied by New Wave. And that is why we consider New Wave as the most important milestone of modern cinema. Life after New Wave is different because people like Godard, through their films like Pierre Le Fou, like Le Mépris, like Mascula Femina, created an entirely different universe, a universe dedicated to the younger people, to the people of 68. Just imagine Truffaut forecasting what would happen in France after 10 years. If you look at the 400 Blows, the disgusted teacher at one moment saying, it's a point of shame that you cowards, what you will make of your motherland after 10 years. And he didn't know that in 1968, incidentally tell you, Truffaut made 400 Blows in 1958, and in 1968 France will go to their second revolution, May Revolution 1968. So history was made alive. And Godard, when he stated that we are the first group of people to know that history exists, to know that Griffith and Eisenstein exist. So there is no point in trying to create something new. If you like, you can quote something. Godard quoted exclusively from all the sources of cinema. Cinema with them became a cultural repository. In fact, a tissue of quotations taken from all sources of human wisdom. So New Wave is a space where freedom is assured even for the filmmakers. They took cue from Hollywood cinema that if Hollywood can permit you to move freely, take the case of John Ford in Stagecoach, take the case of Alfred Hitchcock, take the case of Nicholas Ray, the most anarchist. If this is possible, then everything is possible in cinema. And that was done by these people. And that is why we always pay tribute to them. We would like to conclude that it is New Wave which acted as the catalyst in modernizing cinema. What was cinema? Cinema is basically a case of storytelling with exceptional variations of people like Eisenstein and Bresson. But in a concerted manner, these people thought and could make us believe that subject has lost all its importance. Even a petty dialogue in a small restaurant can constitute the essence of civilization. They could convince us. A color, how to use it, and how to test the failure when you put it to use. That can also constitute the essence of cinema. Everything under the sun can be experimented with, can be narrated, and can be described, and you can have an organic relationship with your spectator, with your viewer. And you have every right to be knowledgeable. You have every right to be an intellectual. Cinema is no child's play. And therefore, with New Wave, the child's play became an adult occupation. Thus we conclude that New Wave is not a movement consisting of only few players like Truffaut, Godard, Rene, Römer and others, Rivette. It is actually a concerted attempt to take over cinema from the stale, morbid entertainment game. With them, cinema learned how to work with the great arts, with poetry, with painting, and with sculpture.